I'm Scott Weatherly. Welcome to 20th Century Geek. Every week there are tons of new comics on the stands, and that's great. I love picking up my books on a weekly basis and getting the next chapter of the saga. Then once completed, these stories of modern myth abound in some excellently presented collected editions. Wonderful! So we get new stories all the time, and more recently, one headline-grabbing event after another, all taking up space on our shelves. The point is that we move forward week on week. Some things get overshadowed, or even forgotten. Of course, there are books that will always be at the top, and whether you've been reading comics for 30 years, 5 years or 5 minutes, you will have at least heard of them. Everyone knows Watchmen, The Dark Knight Returns, Mouse, or even The Infinity Gauntlet. And rightfully so. These are great books that stand the test of time and should be revisited by anyone, even vaguely interested in comics. However, in the glut of new books, or the top 10 lists of comics to read before you die, I want to highlight 2 comics that I think are woefully underrated and deserve some attention from modern readers. I should make it clear that these choices are my own, and not based on anything other than the fact that I think they are brilliant, but don't seem to be talked about much, or even at all. The first comic I want to talk about always surprises me when I find that comic fans have not heard of it. I first came across it in 1993 when Dark Horse Comics released a monthly serialised adaptation of the film Jurassic Park. It was a backup series, I assume because it also contained dinosaurs. It's titled Cadillacs and Dinosaurs, which is a pretty cool name, but since then I've learned its proper name, Xenozoic Tales. Created in 1987 by Mark Schultz, the series is a pulp mashup of Mad Max and The Lost World. The art is stunning and the writing is strong. This is a true passion project for Schultz, and it shows on every single page. Let me set the scene. The human race's mistreatment of the planet results in a cataclysmic environmental event, driving humans underground for 400 years. Finally, we emerge hoping to reclaim the planet, only to find that the planet is no longer as we left it, and we are no longer the dominant species. The world has reverted to a more prehistoric state and is populated by dinosaurs and strange lizard humanoids. Over time, the human race starts to find its place in the new world order and is able to survive. It is at this point we join the story and start to learn about the people and the new social structure. The primary characters are Jack Tenrec, a guy who has learned how to fix and maintain the machines of the old age. He is a rough and surly guy who understands how the balance of nature has to be maintained. He is trusted and respected by the community around him, which gives him some sway in the way things are done. We also have Hannah Dundee, a scientist from another community who enters the story as an ambassador to create links between the new communities. She is intelligent, brave and adventurous, and more than a match for Jack. The relationship dynamic between these two forms the core of the series as they move from one adventure to another. But this series is so much more than just these two. There is a long list of supporting characters that are pretty well rounded, and they all exist in a world that is easy to believe in. The world building in this series is so good, and while issues that have been published only cover a small area of the world, you get the feeling there is so much more to explore. The series had 15 minutes of fame in the early 90s, with a side-scrolling fighting game released by Capcom in 1993, and a 13-episode animated series in 1994. Episodes can easily be found with a little digging on YouTube, and I would encourage you to do so. The animation is solid and the stories are fun. It's on par with, if not better than, any of the early 90s Saturday morning cartoons. I was lucky enough to catch up with Darren and Ruth from the excellent podcast Xenozoic Xenophiles recently to talk about their love of the series and why you should give it a read.
Well, this is great. We appreciate the invitation very much, so this will be fun.
No, I'm really looking forward to it. So let's get stuck in then, really. So when did you guys come across this comic? Like, when did you come across the book?
Wow, all the way back in 1987.
Wow.
Yeah, so we discovered it when it was new. We can remember we picked up issue 3 off the shelf new.
Wow, so you were there at the sort of the ground floor, getting in there early.
Yeah, it was such a big seller for a small black and white, independent comic that issues 1 and 2 were impossible to find just a few months after they had come out. I can remember we hunted and hunted forever for issues 1 and 2 before we could find them.
Right, we kept wanting to know, how did this begin? I want to find this.
They're still not particularly easy. Even on eBay, they go for quite a bit, like an original copy in good condition.
Yeah, the original issues are tough to find. They're generally expensive when you can find them. We were amazed. Somebody sent us a message just recently. They actually found one in like a $1 box or something like that, issue 6 or issue 9. That's really rare. It was probably mislabeled.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Someone else's misfortune is your luck. That's it.
Yes.
That's right. I do love that Mark Schultz has gotten together with Flesk Publications, and Flesk has been keeping their Xenozoic collection in print. Now, it's been in print since 2010, so it's a wonderful way to pick them up. But it's not the same as having, the original floppies with, all the backup stories and everything. But it's a fantastic book that I would always highly recommend.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, the collected editions are good because it's a concise way of getting it. But yeah, you can't beat the original floppies and going through and that sort of thing. So okay, so when you came across it, and you obviously got it at Graphic, what makes it stand out for you then, as a compared to everything else? What makes it? Why do you go back to it so often? Where's the passion come from?
Oh, it's so imaginative and smart. So it's thought provoking and it's adventurous and just so creative.
Yeah, Bruce right. It has all the elements of a traditional action-adventure story. Hey, it's got dinosaurs in there, so it grabs you on the fun level, but the stories themselves are really intelligent and intricate, and small things have large impacts, so those things keep you wanting to read. But Mark Schultz art, that just grabs you and draws you in. There's no way not to pick up something drawn by Mark Schultz and think, oh, this is amazing.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, one of the things I noticed recently, it's Bernie Wigston, the artist who died recently, who did like Swamp Thing, and
yes,
his art, and then there's a couple of, it's that sort of, there's an era of sort of like late 70s, early 80s, and Mark Schultz's art appears to be in that sort of like ethos that when it's in black and white, their pencil stylings are so distinctive and so sort of detailed, but without being complex.
Yes. And that's a sign of real talent.
Totally.
Being able to have,
I think, I go back to it and I say you can just, you mentioned it on one of your podcasts in the first issues, there's you could just sit and just look and you forget to sort of turn the page. You've read it, but you're just looking at the pictures again and again because they're so well done. You can pick up so many details from them.
It's so rich.
Yeah, rich is the right word. You're absolutely right. You can just stare at his art. And, some of those issues were colored later on by Marvel, but you really, Mark Schultz stuff has to be seen in black and white because he just excels at it. And we've talked to him, and he's such a fan of black and white film, and that's where a lot of his interest comes from. And you can really see how nuanced and layered and how he uses gray tones, and you can just see that. You want to see his stuff in black and white.
And how important the lighting is.
Yes, exactly. That's what I was about to say. The lighting and the use of shadow in it is so important that I came across it in colour. When I first came across it, actually, it was used as Dark Horse did the Jurassic Park movie adaptation in comic form, and the backup for that was out of order. It's weird enough, but they did them out of order. But was like the short story version of like Xenozoic Tales. And it was all been coloured, and I thought, oh, this is interesting, it's fine, it looks good. But when you see it in black and white, as it was intended, it is a different experience. Yes,
it definitely is. Yeah, he just recently published a book called Storms at Sea. It came out just last year or year before, and a new edition just came out right before the holidays. but it's a novella. But the way it's laid out is every time you open each 2-page spread, one side of the one page is a piece of art, and the next page is text. So it's like reading a novella, an illustrated novel, and every other page is a beautiful illustration. And his illustrations are so rich there. I've told him that I want them all to be hanging up in an art gallery so I can just stare at them because you do get sucked into them, just like you were saying.
And that's it. I mean, because also with Mark Schultz, he must, because this is an independent comic, so he must own all the original, the artwork, all the original pages and that sort of thing. So I'm assuming he's still got those.
He does. He's mentioned that to us, that's his. He's maybe saving that for his retirement.
I'm sure he is, and I'm sure they will make him a lot of money, because some of these pages, there's a couple of splash pages and larger pages that I would love to have the original art, like you say, just hanging on the wall. It would be amazing to just sit and look at that larger original piece. Yeah, fantastic. So that's what stands out for you from an art point of view. I mean, what about the merchandising then? So the other side of it then, there's the cartoon and there's the computer game and that sort of thing. They're a twist on it, but what are your thoughts on those?
It's really exciting. I mean, there's nothing as good as the original, I think, with the Xenozoic Tales, but in all honesty, the animated series, while it's not as good as the comic, it's one of the best animated series to come out of the 90s easily. It's very well done. It's a smart, intelligent Saturday morning cartoon show. That's probably why it only ran 13 episodes, is because it didn't fit with the rest of Saturday morning TV. It was a bit too thought-provoking and intelligent. But it's a delightful show. And, of course, Topps Comics did a series of comics that tied in with the TV show, followed its continuity, and I think there are 9 issues of that, like three-issue miniseries, and they're really quite good. And like Mark Schultz said himself, it's hard seeing other people play with your characters and do things with your characters that you wouldn't do, but those issues were written by Roy Thomas, and he said, how amazing can it be to have Roy Thomas writing your creation? So they're really good too, and there are just so many things. We have, we were fans way back in the day, so we actually have the line of action figures and even like the Cadillac toy that came out. So we bought all of those when they were new. Those are hard to find now too.
Wow.
But but it's funny, how much merchandise there was. The show sort of exploded, or the comic and title property exploded there for a few years. And Mark Schultz himself mentioned, because he already, as he says, is very slow, but managing the merchandise took up so much of his time that it reduced his production even more. And that's the reason why near the end of the series, you just get usually 1 issue a year, because that's all he could get done. He was managing the merchandising. Yeah. That was taking all of his time.
Yeah, I mean, it's that thing, is it sort of, giving with one hand and taking away with the other, sort of, you can't do everything. It's a shame. But, I mean, this is it's one of those comics that, that with the growth of, like, Image, and you get creator-owned comics and that sort of thing, you get comics in their purest form, like, as their curator intended. So, I think of other great black and white ones, like Walking Dead, even Invincible, sort of those sort of Robert Kirkman ones where he's stuck with it, and even like Todd McFarlane with Spawn. I mean, we're not talking quality, but this is the same with Mark Schultz. This is his vision. It's it in its purest form.
Yes.
Do you think that beyond that it could ever be picked up and done by anybody else, or do you think this is a sort of this will be encapsulated with Mark Schultz?
Oh, I think it needs to be his own. Like it's the essence of the story is tied so much to, I think, the creator and his vision.
And I agree for the most part. I mean, certainly if it continued and did anything else without him, again, it would not be Mark Schultz's Xenozoic Tales, and it wouldn't be as good. But I think that it's such a well-imagined world that he's created. He's created such an amazing world that I think if he handed it over to someone else or licensed it in some other way again, any competent person should be able to do something with the world because it's just so rich. And I would love to see, anything, just like the animated series. Hey, I wish they had done more than 13. Those are really good. It's not Mark Schultz, but they're still really good. I don't think it'll happen, but hey, I would watch a movie based on it or a TV show. That's for sure.
Well, I want a live-action movie. That would be incredible.
That was obviously, when I sort of first contacted you guys, it was about that. I mean, the thought of this not be in this day and age of blockbusters, and like you said, they're even becoming more thought-provoking, and with things like Arrival and Passengers, and they can do clever sci-fi. But you've got Mad Max, you've got Jurassic World, all the Marvel films. Like, this is ripe for the picking. This is.
You're absolutely right, Scott. This should be a movie, and I'm like you. I don't know why it isn't yet, because it would be a better movie than most of the other summer blockbusters that come out. Because I have confidence in Mark Schultz that he would only license it to someone that he was confident would do something with it. And I really am just, in complete agreement with you. That really needs to happen. And unlike the Saturday morning cartoon, where maybe it didn't quite fit because it was a bit too smart for most Saturday morning cartoons, it's not what most kids wanted, but in a cartoon. But it's perfect for a live action film. It would be much more rich and I think thought-provoking and a much nicer world than Jurassic Park, because the Jurassic Park movies, Jurassic World, they're good, fun movies, but really they're fairly limited in what they can do. They're struggling to try to create more stories because they're sort of boxed in with how this thing is set up with this island originally. Whereas in Xenozoic Tales, hey, the whole world's covered in dinosaurs. You can go lots of places and do lots of stories.
Oh, yeah, totally. I totally agree. And this is the thing you said about the richness of the world. Recently I've gone back and I read the Topps comics and I read the full sort of, Mark Schultz's Xenozoic up to now. The whole thing feels like a snapshot. Obviously because, like I say, it's limited time and the limited run. It's almost like Tolkien-esque. There's so much more to that world that hasn't been explored, that you could lift it up and you could go to the other side of the Americas, or you could go to Europe, or you could go to Australia, or there's so much more to this world that could be explored. If the world of like H.P. Lovecraft can be expanded, or Tolkien, or the role-playing games, video games, movies, this is just... The merchandise on this is endless, really.
I love your enthusiasm there, Scott. I agree with it.
Very good point. Like, it is such a wealth of unexplored territory.
Well, and it's even like with Storms at Sea. The Storms at Sea novella sort of tells the beginning of the 500-year gap that we have before the Xenozoic Tales story starts. You sort of get the beginning of what was happening. And there's so much potential in that 100-page book that you read a little section and you think, oh my gosh, that could be a novel in and of itself. There's so much there. Again, a wonderfully rich world he's created, and you're exactly right. We're big fans of Tolkien's work, and you're right, this world is as rich as Middle-earth, or at least has the potential to be as rich as Middle-earth.
I think so. I think there's so many, and now they like the shared universe is the sort of is the world. Your Marvel shared universes and all these other things they're trying to do. Why you couldn't have a Xenozoic shared universe that's does all its bits and pieces?
Yeah,
it'd be brilliant.
It would be, and maybe with Mark Schultz now returning to the series, doing this new graphic novel that will be out next year, maybe it'll start attracting some new attention again, because there'll actually be new material. Right now, I think it's been 20 years since there was any new material. People like you and us and your friends at the comic book shop, everyone who read it remembers it and has a lot of respect for it, but it hasn't been new in a long time. But now it's suddenly going to be new again. Maybe there'll be some renewed interest. I hope so.
That would be fabulous.
This was sort of the point of why I've picked these. The theme up for this month is very much because of that reason. I mean, there's so many books that I think there's books that rightfully stand up and people read them again and again. Like Watchmen or The Dark Knight and all those sorts of things, and they're great. But then they sort of, in them becoming such titans, there's smaller, and in some cases I'd say better books that get pushed aside. And and I think because this was it Kitchen Sink Press who?
That's right.
Put these out originally.
Yes, Dennis Kitchen was the publisher's name, so that's where that name came from. You're right again, Scott. I mean, there's just the potential that's there, and I just really am excited about. And I love the theme that you put together for this, because I like what you were just saying. There are many great books that are well respected and deserve it, but there are a lot of other things that are sort of mediocre that get lots of attention, and then you have some really wonderful things that get forgotten along the wayside. And that is a shame when you've got a property that is fabulous and you don't understand why it's not more popular. But this one certainly deserves to be.
Yeah, and I think if Image Comics, as it sort of stands now, had been around, those 25 years ago, it would have easily, this book would have got an absolute massive push, and it would have been probably a different story. But going back to the film, then, just an idea. Then let's cast this. We talked about it. If you were going to see this, who would you want to see in the two leads? I'm just curious.
That question, it's because I think of Mark Schultz and him drawing in black and white.
Yeah.
The thing that excites me so much, I mentioned to you before that I immediately see like Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall, because they have such great chemistry. They both look right. They would do a fantastic job. Of course, they're not available right now.
Right. Some people of that feel in that era.
Yeah.
But this is exciting. We've had some thoughts about this as well, wanting to think of who are some modern actors that could really pick up and pull this off as well. You had mentioned Jennifer Connelly as Hannah Dundee. We're a big fan of hers, especially from like the period of time with The Rocketeer and stuff like that. But what about you, Scott? Who have you given some thought to?
Well, it was when you look at the art, and it's very pulp driven. It does very much feel of an era, and again, I'm a big fan of like Jennifer Connelly. Again, The Rocketeer, another comic that I think has been sidelined a little bit by what's happened recently with IDW. But going back to the originals, Dave Stewart's original, they're brilliant. But I did go back to like Haley Atwell. I think is
great,
very good for that sort of era. And the rough and tumble sort of style, it was Tom Hardy, I think, could really pull it off.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that's a good choice, too.
But yeah, it is. I think it'd be really fascinating to have those sorts of characters. They've got to represent that pulp era as well as the modern era.
Yeah, I really like both of your choices. And Haley Atwell, what a perfect choice. I mean, her Agent Carter TV show, I mean, that was just a fabulous show. I still weep when I think about it being canceled. It's so good.
Yeah, it was. There was another missed opportunity. I don't think it got the audience it deserved. Actually, that show.
Right.
Okay, brilliant. So, if you're going to sell this comic, because I say I'm trying to throw some other ideas at this. I'm going to cover a couple of other books as well. But if you were going to try and sell Xenozoic Tales to someone who'd never seen it before, how would you try and sell it to them?
So, you call it Cadillacs and Dinosaurs, and that almost sells itself.
It does? You're right, yeah. Yeah.
Fast automobiles, dinosaurs chasing.
Yeah. I do love that title. It's 3 words tells you what this series is about. So that was a really great idea that they came up with. It's really interesting to me to think of the fact that they have to license that title from GM because General Motors owns, of course, the trademark on Cadillac, so they can't even use that word in the title without paying GM money.
Which is crazy when you think about it. That might be one of the limitations on it, but it is. It's almost like a perfect elevator pitch, isn't it? Just Cadillacs and dinosaurs.
You don't need 10 seconds. You just need 3 seconds to say 3 words.
That's it.
But, but with the popularity, like we were talking about, of things like Jurassic Park and Mad Max, I guess that's another way to sell it. It really sort of is Jurassic Park meets Mad Max for a modern audience. So that's a perfect combination that you were suggesting earlier that I think would sell it.
Yeah, I think that's how I always see it in my head. is that action adventure, you know, with dinosaurs.
Yes.
It's everything. It's everything I've wanted when I was a kid, really.
And still today.
It's perfect. It is.
And I really enjoy like the mystery and the, post-apocalyptic kind of setting where, there's kind of like an archaeological discovery. It's like finding things from the 20th century that have survived to that point in time, and they're trying to figure out.
Yeah, just like in a recent issue we were rereading, and Hannah Dundee's learning to drive, and she asks Jack what a turn signal is, and he has no idea.
Yeah, I'm sure the highway code is a little bit sort of out the window.
Yeah.
No, that's brilliant. I mean, that's the thing. It's such a it's the thing is here about post-apocalyptic. Anything that seems to be post-apocalyptic these days is grim. I mean, I love the most recent Mad Max, but it's still a grim look at the future. Walking Dead, it's a grim look at the future. That's all a grim look at but this has got heart and an element of fun to it that,
Yeah.
I do really appreciate that. The banter between the two main characters, where you can have very serious moments and then also some levity, and just that lightness.
Yeah, no, I agree. It again, just another example of the rich world he created, because they're also very well-rounded three-dimensional characters. They have, they really are well-rounded because they can joke with each other, they can get angry with each other, they can have very different points of view but still respect each other's opinions, and you don't get those sorts of, character depth interactions in most comic books.
No, totally agree. Yeah, these are definitely characters and not tropes or stereotypes. They're really well rounded.
Yes.
Which I think is a real credit to Mark Schultz writing some very, very different characters and giving them depth, because it would have been easy just to sort of say, oh, they're like this, and off to the races, here's another dinosaur. But he really does, to write this and do it, he really does clearly put his heart into it.
And that's another good point. We heard him talk about that it was important to him in creating his two characters. He said most people would have naturally made the man the scientist who talks out of knowledge, and the woman the person who believes in, sort of more like a shaman and believes in rituals and all about feeling. And he immediately, as soon as he knew he wanted two characters like that, he knew he wanted to reverse that. So Hannah is the intelligent scientist who thinks with her head, and Jack is the one who reacts and, follows these mystical ways. So,
follows his instincts.
Yes.
And I think the thing about, with Hannah Dundee as a character in particular, the thing I like the best is the fact that she's not a damsel in distress all the time.
Right.
Again, it would have been just easy to have her as be the eye candy that has to be saved, and so you might be intelligent but always ends up in trouble. But she's never that.
Right, and I admire that.
Which is quite. I suppose it was 87. So you say that it was first released.
That's
yes.
right. Yes, so, there was a short story that was Death Rattle Comics number 8. That was an anthology comic. So the very first sort of pilot, little short story came out in, I think, really late 86, November or something. But then the comic started in March 87.
Wow.
So having such an excellent, strong female character at that point in time is remarkable.
Yeah, definitely. It's not, especially going into sort of the late 80s and early 90s, when it was very much a man's world in the comics industry. To have her as a standout character is really good writing.
Yes.
I agree.
Excellent.
Very much appreciated.
So any final thoughts? Anything you want to finally throw in about Xenozoic or Mark Schultz?
Yeah, I would really encourage anyone out there who likes this series to join his Facebook page, Mark Schultz Xenozoic Tales and Other Stories, because he posts regular updates about the progress on the new book. He even publishes or will post from time to time little bits of art.
Yes, those are exciting to see.
Yeah, so it's wonderful. It's a wonderful way to follow and keep up with what he's up to. He's not very active. He's not active anywhere else on social media, so that one place is where you can get all the latest information. So I just encourage people to go out and certainly track this story down if you haven't read it, because it's more than worthwhile.
Definitely. Okay, and where can people find you guys on the internet?
Well, thank you for asking. So we've we love this invitation. Oh, and I just have to, before we get into our stuff, I have to say how much we love your show. I'm so happy that you reached out to us because we had sadly not found your show on our own. You reached out to us. We subscribe to your show, and the nice thing about it is we now have a back catalog that we're listening our way through, and we're really loving your show. So.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah,
I really appreciate
I gotta listen to this one. I gotta listen to this one. Karen, have you listened to that one?
That's exactly right. That's what we keep doing. And I was actually texting a friend of mine this morning, saying, "Hey, you got to listen to this episode of 20th Century Geek because you'll love it."
Excellent. So. Well, I tell you what, if you guys have got, I'm doing all kinds. I like to keep it different. I'm doing all kinds of different topics, but if you guys have got any suggestions or anything else you think, from the 20th century I should be pulling forward into the 21st, let me know. I'm happy to open up to any topics or opinions.
Oh, we'll be listening and we'll share some thoughts with you. But thank you for asking where people can find us, because certainly Xenozoic Xenophiles, that's the podcast that we're talking about here that we do dedicated to Xenozoic Tales with Mark Schultz. I hope everyone will give it a listen. Start with episode 8, which is the Mark Schultz interview. You get to hear him talk for nearly an hour, so that's fantastic. But also we do 2 other podcasts that I think are also underappreciated comics.
We have Trekker Talk, which is about Ron Randall's Trekker. She's the lead character in that is a sci-fi bounty hunter in the 23rd century.
And it's another example of a strong female character created in 1987 that people who like Hannah Dundee will like Mercy St. Clair as well. She's her own woman, and she's in charge. And then the third podcast we do is Warlord Worlds, which is about the comic creations of Mike Grell, including his series The Warlord, John Sable, and his run on Green Arrow.
Excellent. I was going to say, I've just started listening to Trekker, your podcast on that, because I didn't know anything about that, so that's been really interesting, that one.
Excellent. I'm happy to hear that, too. That's fantastic, Scott. We're going to be really good friends. We like all the same things.
I do. I'm really enjoying it. It's been an education. I mean, I did listen to the Mark Schultz interview, and it was fascinating. So I'm going to be picking up his other book. I've got a terrible memory for names. What's the name of the novella that he wrote that you said was
released? The Storms at Sea.
Storms at Sea. Oh, it's on my Amazon wish list at the moment, so I've got it there to remind me. So I will be getting a copy of that sometime soon.
Well, and hopefully Mark Schultz will come to a convention in the UK when he's promoting the new book, if you'll get lucky.
That'd be awesome. If I could meet him, just get him to get a signed copy and just, shake his hand, that'd be fantastic.
He's such a nice man. He's always happy to sign things. So he's not doing any convention appearances this year while he's working on the book, but he'll be making them next year while he's promoting it. So that'd be great.
Excellent. Thank you very much, guys. I shall leave you to your Sunday afternoon. But thank you very much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Scott. This is great.
No, excellent. I'll be in contact. I'll let you know when it comes out, and hopefully we'll talk again sometime soon.
I'm sure we will. I'm very confident about that, Scott. And thank you again for this. It was a lot of fun.
No problem. Thank you, guys.
Take care. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye. So it was really good, guys, and I do recommend, if you have any interest in Xenozoic Tales or Trekker or anything like that, please do track down their podcast. It's really well produced and a really insightful look at those comics. Anyway, the second comic that I would want to talk about is a bit of a tough one. It was never printed as its own series, and there appears to have only been one collection of it, which is criminal. It appeared in the pages of 2000 AD in the early 90s. I want to talk about Armored Gideon. Now, I haven't read this for a few years, and I don't have all the issues of 2000 AD with the stories in, but I do intend to after going back and reading what I do have. I'm going to assume that you haven't heard of it. So let's start with an overview of the plot. There is a dimension called the Edge, populated by demons that want nothing more than to escape and destroy whatever they come across. Millennia ago, to stop them, a race of ageless beings called the Silent Ones created 2 super-destructive robots, Armored Gideon and his brother, Armored Jerubal. These titanic creations fought a never-ending battle to stem the flow of demonic creatures. Unfortunately, Jerubbaal became jealous of the attention Gideon received, and so turned on him. He defeated Gideon, but in his short victory was overwhelmed by the demonic creatures and driven to our dimension. While he managed to stop the flow of demons, he was deactivated and buried on Earth to be forgotten. Back on the edge, Gideon was reactivated and continued the battle. Jump to the 20th century and Jerubbaal is reactivated and wants revenge on Gideon. Jerubbaal is able to get Gideon to come to Earth and a knock-out full-on battle commences. This shouldn't be a problem, as the Silent Ones have made them so they will be invisible, except maybe for their destruction. They can, however, be seen by psychic photographer and reporter Frank Weitz. He is also able to capture them on film. So like any reporter, he pursues them. In the process, he manages to deactivate Gideon, leaving our dimension unprotected. So he must now risk his life to get Gideon back and stop Jerubbaal and the demons. And this is just the first story. There were several short and longer series between 1990 and 1995, all written by John Tomlinson and drawn by Simon Jacob. The concept for this series is so good that I am gutted that there are not more stories or a collected edition I can return to. The art is incredibly stylish and the character designs are awesome. It is said that the sign of a good character design is the ability to recognise the character from its silhouette. By that definition, Gideon is a perfect character design, but a silhouette does not do him justice. He is an immense robot built to destroy, but the details shouldn't work. He has a massive barrel chest and an oversized limbs with a thin and sinewy midsection. His design is just so 90s. Seriously, Google Armoured Gideon 2000 AD and check out the design for yourself. Moreover, the concept is great fun. A giant robot fighting demons. It's simple, high concept fluff at its best. Granted, Gideon doesn't have much character depth, but then he is a robot. There is some much better depth and exploration of the human character Frank Weitz, who we find out was a war photographer, which has had its own effect on him. He becomes entwined in this ancient battle and provides a pretty good perspective character for the reader. He's jaded and thinks he has seen it all, but nothing prepares him for Gideon and Jerubbaal. A side note about the writing, Gideon and Jerubbaal, they may sound like biblical names. Well, you're not far off. They are the two names of a military leader and prophet whose battle and victory over the Midianites is recounted in several chapters of the Jewish Hebrew Bible. You can probably tell that all this incredibly well-drawn demon bashing is great fun, and that's why I like this series, and I think it deserves another look. Recently we had Pacific Rim, which I was a big fan of. I can't think of anything better than a Jaeger-sized Gideon monster-mashing his way across the silver screen. A film of this series would have crazy action, scary demon monsters, and a great story about jealousy and redemption. Hollywood, are you listening? I was very lucky recently to have the opportunity to speak with the creator of Armoured Gideon and former 2000 AD editor, John Tomlinson. Okay, so, well, first off, thanks very much for taking the time to do this.
That's quite all right. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
I've got to say, I was just chancing my luck trying to get in contact with you, so I'm glad it worked out, really, contacting Eagle Moss, and wasn't sure if it was going to work.
Yes, well, I tend to communicate mainly by email because it's easy to keep track of things. So, we've all got desk phones, but I look at it with deep suspicion on the few occasions it does ring. So I didn't get your message immediately, but obviously you left enough details for me to get back to you, and I thought, well, I haven't ever done a podcast, so it might be fun. So I might be wrong.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, I'm hoping it is.
You asked me, but I'm sort of looking forward to it.
Yeah, no. Well, I'll just give you a gist then. Is the idea is I'm looking at a lot of things from the 20th century, really. Sort of that's where pop culture was born, and for me, when I was a kid, the thing that sort of got me involved in comics and sci-fi in general and all that kind of thing is 2000 AD.
Yeah.
So I sort of got into it probably like 89, 90. You know, so for me, that sort of like the early 90s stuff is 2000 AD to me.
So I think that was when it first, the format changed. They started doing the glossy covers. I think that's when Slain, the Horned God started, and the Dead Man, and various other things. Yeah, it was quite a change of direction for 2000 AD.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing. I think it caught my attention. And I've since then I've gone back and read all the earlier stuff for a lot of it, but the early 90s stuff, I still go back and I still read it. Some of the it seems like a real weird, strangely punk era. Like there's you've got like Mark Millar and Grant Morrison doing stuff, and a lot of other guys like yourself doing just things that just seemed really crazy and sort of totally out there that I hadn't seen anywhere else, even like in American comics.
Yeah, I think certainly now 2000 AD is the only one of its kind. I mean, when I first started reading comics as a kid, I mean, every newsagent had like a rack of British comics, and the idea that they might all die out would never have occurred to us. But 2000 AD is the only comic from that era that's still going, and certainly the only weekly British comic. I mean, it's a real anomaly now, and but it seems to have led a strangely charmed life. I can only assume that it's fated to keep going. I mean, in like the late 90s or the 90s when I was working on it, people were always doomsaying about 2000 and how it would almost certainly never survive to reach the year 2000. So the notion that we'd still be going, it would still be going 17 years later.
Yeah.
Would have been. I mean, the question we always used to get was, well, what will 2000 be called in the year 2000? I mean, serious consideration was given to that at one point. As well, should we call it 3000 AD? Should we change it every year so it becomes 2001 AD, 2002, etc., etc.? But
oh wow!
And I mean, everyone realised quite rightly. I'm sure that it's a brand. Even get 17 years beyond that, and nobody really thinks about the fact that 2000 is the past. I mean, it's just the name of the comic now, and it's that's what everyone knows it as. It's pointless to change it, but I mean, I'm thrilled that it's still going, and I still read it. They don't send it to me anymore. I dropped off the mailing list some time ago, but I still pick it up. You can still get it in Smith's, and you can still get it in some newsagents. So it's still around, and long may it continue. And in fact, I heard this week, I think it was only announced this week, that there's possibly going to be a Judge Dredd TV series.
Yes, I was very excited to hear that.
Rebellion are planning. I don't know how far along they are with it. Whether there's a production company or a budget or a cast attached. Yes, I suspect not. But I mean, it would lend itself brilliantly to that, and also that's bound to have a long-term effect on the longevity of the comic. It was one of a kind. I think even when it first appeared, when it was first published. But I think if it has survived, well, it has survived this long, largely because it's so good, and it's not afraid to reinvent itself, which it still does, and from time to time, it's still capable of surprising and even shocking people.
Well, I think that's the thing. It's consistently been good and fresh. But it's also like the birthing place, for it's like the a trialing ground, paying your dues for a lot of writers and artists and stuff that you then see go on to do big things. I say like Grant Morrison, Warren Ellis, Alan Moore, all these British writers that have gone on to work in DC and Marvel and stuff. So it clearly has cachet. It still does today that people will go back and look at it.
Yes, I think it was Alan Moore who wants to describe 2000 AD as a shop window for American comics companies.
Yes.
I mean, the nature of the industry over here is we still can't work, especially now when there virtually isn't a British comics industry. There's no way that 2000 AD can afford to pay the same rates, or certainly give creators creators' ownership of their work to the same extent that American comics can. And so I suppose it was inevitable, really, that the best of 2000s creators would move to the States and would get work elsewhere. But so many of them did start off on 2000 AD, and it is a great training ground because you only have 6 pages, which is especially if you're writing a complete episode of something like a Future Shock or Tharg's Terror Tales or Pulp Fiction or whatever the various one-off stories. It's a very restrictive format, so it forces you to be creative. And I think to go from that to the luxury of having 22-page stories is must be an incredible luxury for British right. Less so for the. I don't know what the deadlines are like for artists. I imagine they're quite intensive. I mean, the idea of drawing a 22-page story is obviously a bit. As somebody once said, it takes 3 seconds to type 1,000 ravening monsters come over the hill, but an artist might spend a week drawing it. So it's tougher for the artist, but of course, American comics have hoovered up a fair amount of British artists as well, and some of the people like Richard Elson and Kev Walker and Doug Braithwaite, almost all of them, 2008 top artists, all seem to have made the transition quite happily, and and Alan Davis in particular, who's he started off in English comics, but is absolutely ideal for superhero comics. And one of his big breaks was also in 2000 AD with Harry 20 on the High Rock. And I think, I wouldn't want to misquote him, but I'm sure I remember him saying that he really had to up his game on that strip because it was such a punishing schedule with having to produce 6 pages every week that he had to modify the way he drew. And you can see, if you look back on that now, you can see his style evolve throughout the course of that series until it becomes much slicker and much more like the way he draws now. But anyway, I'm rambling off onto a weird cul-de-sac now.
No, it's good. It's fascinating.
Another question.
Well, the thing I'd say is actually, if we wind back a little bit, so how did you get involved in comics? Was it always something you wanted to do, or was it did it just land in your lap, or?
Well, I'd always been a fan. Like almost everyone in comics, I grew up loving comics, and when I was a kid, I used to read things like Smash and Lion and Valiant, all the things that were on the shelves at that time. So I was very inspired by those. But then when I was about 10 or 12 or something, one of my mates from school, his mum ran a comic store on the local market, and it was full of old Marvel and DC titles. So I very quickly became a Marvel fan and started relentlessly copying all the artwork and trying to create my own stories and so on. And I just grown up with it. And I went to art college. I studied graphic design, but it was always kind of the back of my mind that I wanted to get into comics in some capacity. So at the end of the first year, they did a kind of a placement where you could go and work in a design studio or an ad agency or whatever, and for 2 weeks in order to try out your supposed skills. But I really wanted to go to Marvel, or really actually anywhere in comics. I just wanted to have a go at working at comics in some form. So I wrote to IPC, as they were then, and DC Thompson and Marvel UK, and only Marvel replied actually, and they invited me straight away. So I went. They were based in Jadwin House in Kentish Town at the time, which was I think the building's still there. I think it's long since been converted into flats, but it was an absolute tumble down ruin at the time. When it rained, the water would pour in from 3 different cracks in the ceiling, and all the the desks were placed around the outside of the office because if you place them in the inside, the middle of the office, there was a good chance the floor would collapse. So that was the kind of state the building was in. And there were piles of comics all the way along the corridor, not just the ones that Marvel UK published, but they would get regular shipments of everything that Marvel US published at the time. So that was around time Don Byrne was doing Fantastic Four, Frank Miller was doing Daredevil. It was a really good time for comics. I just became more enthused than ever, and when I left college, got degree in graphic design, but still I only really wanted to work in comics. So I contacted Marvel again, and they gave me a regular job. So I was there for about 5 years, but I've been in and out of comics, either in a freelance or a full-time capacity ever since. It's never really gone away. And I can't think of anything I'd rather do or that I'd be capable of doing by now. I think comics has ruined me for any other walk of life professionally. Well, but the short answer is I was a fan, and I managed to turn it into regular work.
One of the lucky few that were able to turn it into a job. When you were at Marvel, then what was it? Cause I read it recently. Actually, it was you and Dan Abnett. Your run on Knights of Pendragon.
Yes.
Which I quite enjoyed. I really like the early, the Marvel UK stuff. So you got Knights of Pendragon, Motormouth, and Kill Power, Death's Head, all that kind of stuff. It's all very British, but very 90s at the same time. There's lots of pouches and big guns, but it's still very British.
Well, did you ever read the original series of Knights of Pendragon before that all started? It was that era that you're talking about. It began in the early 90s, and it really started when Paul Neary came to Marvel UK as the editor-in-chief. But previous to that, Steve White and Jenny O'Connor were the managers. Dan and I wrote with a lot of plot input from Steve, and he was at least as much as involved as we were. And it was drawn by Gary Erskine, who was nowadays he's perhaps better known as an inker, but he's still very much in and around comics, and that was some of his first professional work. So those first series I have a great affection for, but as good as some of the other stuff that came out of the Neary-verse, which is what everybody calls it now. I mean, I think Death's Head in particular was a classic. I don't think we really did right by Knights of Pendragon with the second series. I think it became much more of a conventional comics superhero series, which it never was before. I'm not sure what it was before. I think it was probably closest to a Vertigo title than anything. It certainly had elements of horror, and the superhero stuff was very much incidental to the main action. But I mean, when Paul Neary took over at Marvel, he was very determined that it should all be about superheroes, and and we took the decision, rightly or wrongly, to try and turn Knights of Pendragon into a superhero series. And I always felt it strained to become a superhero series, and it never quite worked for me. But anyway, to go back to what I said at the beginning, did you read the first series?
I have done. Yeah, I've got. Weirdly, I got. There is a collection of the first 9 issues, and I've got that, and I've since collected like the original issues and that sort of thing. So I have read it, and it is very much like an eco. In fact, it's in some cases it's very similar to like the messages of like Finn and Slain and those sorts of things.
Yeah. Yes, I'd see why you would say that. Yes, all the green stuff, for want of a better phrase, and the environmental aspects, which was that was very in at the time in the early 90s, and I don't know what we hoped to achieve by with the environmental aspects of Knights of Pendragon. But even now, I very rarely ever go into McDonald's, for example. But if I ever do, I'm always reminded of Pendragon. I feel incredibly guilty, that I'm somehow contributing to the death of the planet. I mean, it was Ben Elton said in one of his comedy routines at the time that eventually mankind will choke to death on a burger, because the idea being that huge swathes of the Amazon and the lungs of the world were being ripped down to make room for scrub pasture in order to feed cattle that would then become Big Macs at a later date. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. I wouldn't want to, incur any kind of retroactive lawsuits. But that was what everyone was into at the time. So that was a big aspect of Pendragon. The managing editor at that time was it was sort of divided between Jenny O'Connor and Steve White, but the environment. Arthurian aspect from Dan, who's a real kind of Arthurian buff and had read Mort Arthur and all the King Arthur stories in various forms, which I later had to swat up on. but I was drafted because I'd worked on Captain Britain, Marvel UK's Captain Britain monthly, and I was familiar with that side of it. So those three things were all woven together to create the first series, and it's I look back at it now, and it's a bit clunky, and there's a lot wrong with it. But I can still see the enthusiasm, the love we had of the material, and also just because we were all much younger at the time, just to be actually writing comics, episodic comics, you can see us kind of learning on the job, and particularly Gary Erskine, whose artwork just gets better with every episode. I mean, there was I think it was the first 9 issues have been collected, but there was another. I think there's another 9 issues, 18 in total. And Gary's artwork just goes bonkers. It just gets better and better as he goes along.
You're not wrong. I really like. I mean, towards the end, it gets really good. I mean, it's a series that it sort of in both volumes. I think, like you say, Volume 1 and Volume 2. It's on the periphery of like the Marvel universe, but the artwork in it throughout is always interesting. It's always really, really good. Which is one of the reasons I like it, and I'm always disappointed to see that. I know Marvel, it's a very fickle company, really. They'll print and reproduce stuff that they know is going to sell. They're a business, but the fact that they've never produced a full collection of some of this stuff from the Marvel UK, I think, is really disappointing.
Well, they haven't. I mean, there was a collection came out, I think, last year of Frontier Comics, which is Marvel UK's attempt in the early '90s to do a Vertigo type series, and there were I think there were 4 titles at part of Frontier Comics, and they were much more on the kind of the horror. Well, it was much more like Vertigo than anything else, I suppose. The only one that I really remember now is Children of the Voyager, which was written by Nick Abadzis and drawn by Paul Johnson, and it's every bit as good as anything that I remember Vertigo were doing at the time.
Yeah.
That's something that belatedly, perhaps, since it came out in the early '90s, that Marvel have recognised was good, and that's been collected in a very nice package, a trade paperback. You can buy all that stuff, and it's. But I think if they're not doing quite so much new or original material now, it's because it's really incredibly pricey, and it's very very expensive to produce, and there's no real guarantee of a return on your investment. So I think perhaps Marvel or Panini now are a bit more risk averse than they used to be.
Yeah.
But I think also there are other factors at play. When Disney first took over Marvel, I mean, at that point, Panini were doing some wonderful original strips. There was a Spider-Man strip I can't remember if it was weekly, fortnightly, or monthly, but a UK-originated Spider-Man strip written by, I think, Tharg and drawn by Andy Tong, who's a fantastic artist, and it was just lovely stuff. But when Disney took over, it very swiftly became a reprint title again, and I think that was an edict from above rather than Marvel UK suddenly decided, well, this stuff isn't selling, let's just go back to being a reprint company. I don't think that was the plan at all, because they were producing some really impressive work that still stands up now. So yeah, as ever with British comics, there's certainly no shortage of talent and talented creators, and certainly no shortage of ideas. But you really have to go to the States to get work, to actually, to do anything with it.
I suppose I say they break. Yeah, so like say this, what do they call it? Breaking into the big leagues kind of thing. It's the international stage. But yeah, okay. So going back to 2000 AD then. So when you went over there, was Armored Gideon your first work then for 2000 AD?
Well, it was my first regular series. I mean, I went freelance in, I can't remember when it was. It was either 1989 or 90. I can't remember. But at that point, Steve Cook, who was the designer on 2000 AD for a long time, he designed that sort of familiar red lozenge 2000 Ideal logo everyone knows. Well, he and I started off at Marvel UK about the same time, and he went freelance about 6 months before I did, and he got studio space in this place in Blackfriars, it was only about a 5-minute walk from where 2000AD's offices were at the time. It was this place called Irwin House, which Steve McManus always used to describe as Vermin House because it was because of the hot and cold running rodents. So it was a terrible place. But Steve had started getting work from 2018, and he said, "Well, look, now's a great time to go freelance. There's a unit just come up at the studio. They're needing design and editorial cover. Just go freelance." So, after much deliberation, I eventually did. But what the first things I wrote a couple of Future Shocks. There was and one of those was drawn by Simon Jacob, was the artist on Armoured Gideon, and it was just a one-off story called Fat Chance. But Simon's artwork is very different than anything that had appeared in 2000 at the time, and since actually. But it certainly lent itself towards horror and fantasy. And I didn't encounter it before. When I was at Marvel UK, he'd sent some samples in which we published, and I knew his work quite well. So. That Future Shock seemed to go down quite well, and so Richard Burton and Alan Mackenzie, who were the editors at the time, were desperately looking for something to give Simon to draw, and they thought of me because of that Future Shock. So I suppose Armoured Gideon evolved from that, but I was still very. I think this was either just before or around the same time as Knights of Pendragon. I was still very new to writing comics, and the thing I remember most about the first series, Armageddon, was that I made it up as I went along. I came up with what I thought was pretty reasonable first episode, but then I had absolutely no idea where it was going to go after that. And I remember I went to a convention at the time where it was announced, and it was Simon's art had some artwork together, and he was showing it to people, and someone came up to me and said, so what's it about? And my mind went completely blank. I had absolutely no idea. So I really winged the entire series, and much to my chagrin, the first series is the only one that's ever reprinted. First of all, it's in black and white, which is a great shame because Simon is also, among other things, a very fine colour artist. His coloured artwork is beautiful, but the first series is the only one that gets reprinted. All subsequent series were all thoroughly plotted and thought out, and had a beginning, middle, and an end. I knew where I was going with it before I started writing it. But yes, it was that was my first 2080 series, and I think I'd only written a handful of Future Shocks before then. And in the meantime, when either Alan or Richard were on holiday, I'd fill in for a couple of weeks in the office. I'd do bits of design, or I'd write Tharg notes, the introductory each issue, and I'd answer letters and so on. And I just kind of drifted into it, really. The thing is, although I started off reading 2000 AD when it first came out, I was still at school. I somehow drifted away after about 20 issues, and so I wasn't a complete fan at first. I mean, when I was working at Marvel UK, I shared an office with Simon Furman and Richard Starkings, who are both absolutely manic 2000 AD fans, would get every issue and sit and read it in the office and talk about it. And so I was always aware of it, and the amazing Bolland artwork, and I loved the Dread storyline, the Alabama blimps, and a lot of the classic stuff I was aware of. But when I first began to work on it, editorial and doing the design, and so I had to swat up on an awful lot, and I realised that, like you, I suppose I began reading it around the same time as you did, but I also realised I'd missed some of the best stuff. I'd missed some of the real classics, and I had to go back and read things like, Judge Cowler, the Judge Child, the Judder, and all the early Slane stuff, and I was belatedly blown away by it.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. I think really from sort of the mid-80s, there's a load of stuff in there that is really, really good. I mean, it caught my eye, and that was it. I was pretty much hooked, I think, at that point. But I have to say, going back to Armoured Gideon, I'm I reread it actually last night just to sort of the first story.
The first story, of course.
Just to sort of like refresh. So the first, that 10-11 issue episode story. Yeah. So I'm curious now to ask. So when you started that and you got Frank White goes off to the Edge, did you had no idea then that his brother Jerobal was part of it? Then that was a complete on the spot decision later on.
Yes, yeah, that was. I remember. I have vague memories of wanting to pit Armored Gideon against somebody who would be a worthy challenger, and someone who could a run for his money. And up until that point, he'd only annihilated various unpleasant-looking demons. So so the idea of bringing his brother into, I think he was first discovered at the bottom of a sinkhole in the Peace District or something, wasn't he? Falling to pieces and was unwisely revived. So it was it was for two reasons really. It was one to give Armageddon a worthy opponent, and also to bring the action back to Earth for a little bit. But yes, it. I don't know if it's a good or a bad thing that probably a bad thing in those days that you didn't really have to supply a complete plot for an entire series. You really could just make it up as you went along, and I'm sure that some of the more established writers on the title, Mills, Wagner, and Grant, and so on, who are still working on it, were thoroughly plotting everything. But Richard and Alan really gave me free rein to just do whatever I wanted. So it was, I know it was a double-edged sword, but I think, I suppose I did get away with it because it was popular enough that they commissioned a couple more series after that.
Oh, it's really popular. I mean, I love, one of the things I was going to ask then is, because I think it's a really fun series, and like I say, that first one is a hook, and I do the later ones, I think you like you say, you can tell you've sort of got a grasp of it, like a real grasp of like what you want to say with it. But the character design, so did you have those in mind and hand those over to Simon Jacobs, or did he design them?
No, not at all. The only thing I designed was the logo, the Armored Gideon logo. I designed that based on the way that Simon had drawn the robots. But no, I mean I would describe the characters pretty thoroughly in the script. I wrote quite wordy scripts at the time, but then Simon would draw something completely different, which was way better than what I'd come up with. So I didn't really mind. One of the series I really enjoyed was one that incorporated Simon's own characters. The very first thing I saw of his, it was a strip that he'd both written and drawn, and he sent into Marvel UK as a sample story called Disenchantment. It featured a wizard, a kind of a warrior, and a small demonic character who he called Fire Brat, and it was a very kind of tongue-in-cheek, kind of Terry Pratchett sort of idea. And I always really liked that. It was always at the back of my mind. So, I later on, I can't remember if it was the second or the third series, I brought all those characters into it just to give Simon an excuse to draw them again. And that was, I think that the wizard was called Bookwise. The warrior character was called Hawker, and Fire Brat also appeared in there. And they were just woven into an already existing storyline, but those are all entirely designed by Simon, and as were the monsters. So I can't claim any credit for that.
No, I mean I love the design. I think it's one of my for many years it's been one of my sort of go-to doodles. When you sort of sat bored in a meeting or whatever, I sort of draw things. And Gideon's head and body. It's always been one of my go-to sort of doodles. I've always really loved the character design.
Yeah, it's a very strong and distinctive character design, isn't it? I mean, it doesn't look like any other robot in 2000 AD history. I think that was my only brief, really, as well, from Alan and Richard, was giant robots are popular in 2000 AD. Write us a giant robot story, and it came out of that. But I think he sits reasonably well in the pantheon of 2000 AD giant robots. I'm not sure where he'd stack up against MechQuake. I mean, I'd like to see them, battle it out someday. But he was, Armageddon was reasonably popular for reasonably long period of time.
No, it's good. It is one of my sort. It's one of those again. I sort of, when I look back at the period I was a fan of, that sort of early to mid-ish 90s. Because I go from about 89, 90 to usually about 97-ish when I sort of drifted away for a bit. All the series I can remember, other than, like say you've got Judge Dredd, Rogue Trooper, Nemesis the Warlock, all those kinds of ones that I would say are standard. But there was a lot of other stories like Armored Gideon, Finn, Maniac 5, Big Dave, that were really sort of really enjoyed. But
what did you think of the Summer Offensive, by the way? Because that was a very kind of bold experiment for 2000 AD at the time. It was Alan and Richard were still editing it, and they wanted they felt at the time that 2000 AD had become a bit safe, and they wanted to take it a bit more back to its punky roots. So they essentially turned the whole comic over to three writers, Grant Morrison, Mark Millar, and John Smith, and gave them free rein to do what they liked with it. I mean, Morrison and Miller came up with a really great Dread storyline, which is drawn by Carl Zasquero. I still think it's some of his best artwork. Mark Millar and Steve Yoel created Maniac 5, which again I think is just another great giant robot story. And but you had things like Really and Truly, drawn by Ryan Hughes, which was it was a humour strip, I think, and the art was much more cartoony and stylized than 2000 had been used to. But again, it was a real experiment. I think the thing that polarized everyone was Big Dave, which had fantastic artwork by Steve Parkhouse. It was incredibly funny. It's actually my favourite series of the Summer Offensive, but wasn't notably science fiction based or had anything really to do with 2000 AD. So that really polarised the audience. People either loved it or hated it, and I certainly always ask people, do you remember the Summer Offensive?
I do. I know. I really do remember the Summer Offensive. And,
did you enjoy that period?
I did, and I think it's one of those. Like, when you say about going back to its punk roots, I think that's exactly what it is. That I think I really enjoyed is there was an element of, and I think I was too new to comics to say if I knew it was safe before that. But to me, this did take it into sort of like the next gear, of saying, oh, you can be that crazy. Like you've got, or it is your imagination that's holding you back, sort of thing.
I have to say though, I think the notion of 2000 as a punk comic is it's something that's been grafted onto it with the benefit of hindsight. I think because I don't really think that was what they had in mind at the time. I mean, the guys who were working on it at the time, Wagner, Grant, and Mills, and so on, they're about 10 years older than the average punk. So it was their attempt to do something that they'd never really been able to do before. They all started off in romance comics, which obviously was quite restrictive in terms of the kind of comics they wanted to do, and they subsequently moved on to things like battle action, which are war stories, which there's much more of a violent content, and also action. That's right. I forgot to remember, but title edited by Steve McManus, who was obviously one of the later editors of 2000 AD, and was much more violent and unpleasant. But I don't remember it ever being a part of the punk movement. I think that's something that's been imposed on it.
Yeah. I think the thing, when I look back at it all now, and especially when I look at the Summer Offensive and the early 90s stuff, I don't know about punk, because I think you're right. I think there's a retrospective sort of like view on that. But I definitely think it fits into... There was a feel in the early 90s, and I think this goes across a lot of comics, of... a friend of mine actually runs a comic shop. He refers to it as like the early 90s lunacy. Like, it's a real rebellion against everything that seems to have gone before. Yes, you've got The Dark Knight, and yes, you've got Watchmen, and all these sort of like, classics or whatever. But the big things that all like in the 90s, you get like the birth of Image, and you get the Summer Offensive. You get people making comics like The Mask. Dark Horse start doing crazy stuff. Like, everyone is just really pushing the envelope of just
Well, that was also when Image started up more or less as well, which is when all Marvel's best creators jumped ship and started to do their own comics. I mean, okay, that was probably more towards the mid-90s, but yes, it was all symptomatic of something that was going on. And I think, going back to the summer offensive, I think probably the people who reacted negatively towards it were people who've been with 2000 AD from the beginning. And with anything that's been going for a great length of time, you have a very kind of loyal core readership who have been with it from the beginning and think they know the best, the best of 2000 AD. They remember what they consider the best stuff. They don't really like anything that deviates too much from that. It's the same with Doctor Who to some extent, which is now very different from how it was when I was a kid and I used to watch it. It's become something else entirely now, and you couldn't go back and do Doctor Who the way it used to be, because then everyone who's grown up with it since and now feels that they know what Doctor Who should be will say, well, it's not like it should be. That's not what Doctor Who should be. And you have a series of core readerships who've been with 2000 AD from the beginning and remember certain eras with great affection. It always coincides with when they were growing up and when they were most into comics. And so, I mean, it's always very brave and to some extent reckless to completely throw everything up in the air and start again like they did with the summer offensive. But I think it's every so often you have to do something like that. And that was also when Ryan Hughes completely and Steve Cook redesigned the look of the comic, and this new font came in, Scrotnig, which all the cover lines were lettered in, and the credit cards were replaced, and the whole magazine had a complete design overhaul, really. But we were all very excited about it. But I remember being in the office one day. There was someone had torn out a page of Big Dave and nailed it to the front door of Egmont House, where 2000 AD was at the time, and scrawled across it in blood red lettering, "Why, Tharg, why?" Which is, is a great shame. But it just goes to show that, I mean, people are as passionate about 2000 AD as they've ever been. But,
yes,
they certainly are passionate about it. There's no doubt about that.
It's one of those things. I think fans are always going to be fans, and when you start to change things, it's always going to upset everyone. You can't keep it's going to upset someone. You can't keep everybody happy, but you've got to stay relevant. And I think even at the time, I remember reading Big Dave. I found it hilarious. I remember really thinking it was funny, and I was trying to explain it to someone actually recently when I was doing my research for these episodes, and they sort of looked at me a bit like, wow, that sounds odd. But I remember thinking at the time you had you'd already had like the young ones, you'd had Bottom. And it felt a bit in that vein of sort of like just a little. It is offensive, but it's also doing it for satire.
Oh yeah, you could just tell reading it that Miller and Morrison were really having a blast writing and making each other laugh, and it must have been such fun to write. And Steve Parkhouse obviously loved it because the artwork was just every bit as funny, and it was. It should be collected. I'd love to read it all again now, and because I haven't read it since I had to edit it at the time. But I'd love to.
I would love to see it
all collected.
I have to. In fact, actually, recently, and knowing that you work for Eagle Moss, I've got to mention a competitor. I noted that Hatchet Partworker have looked at doing.
Yeah, well, it's actually pronounced Hachette, but I love the way you pronounce it, Hatchet. Yes, everyone should pronounce it Hatchet.
Hachette. I've always Hatchet. Okay, Hachette. They I think they've started to sort of do the idea of an ultimate 2000 AD collection, like they did the Judge Dredd Mega collection.
Yes.
They're looking at doing the 2000 AD ultimate collection. I think the first 4 episodes were Slaying the Horn God Part 1, Strontium Dogs, and I forgot the other one was. But there was no inclination of what the rest of the series would be. But like, it was one of those I was thinking, ooh, there's an opportunity. There might be here. I might get some of these things.
Well, the idea of doing a 2000 AD or Dredd-related collection has come up various times over the years at Eagle Moss, but it was always felt not by me but by management that it might be a bit too niche and a bit too English to have international appeal. You know, the 2000 Eagle Moss markets its various titles and artwork throughout the world, and I know it was felt that it would be that wouldn't be sufficient interest in it, which I think is a great shame. But I mean, from a personal point of view, if Eagle Moss was to do anything 2008 or Dread related, I'd want to be involved, but I wouldn't have final say in the way that I would have been when I was, say, the editor. And I think, to work on something like that, but not have it the way I would like it to be, and not have total control. I think I know that would probably tarnish my memories of having been editor of 2000 AD, and so I'm both drawn to it and kind of wary of it at the same time. And it's not coincidental that Eagle Moss hasn't done anything 2000 AD related, but I haven't pushed for it. I think perhaps for those reasons. I mean, having said that, I did love the Dread mega collections they did, and republishing things like America and some of the classic 2000 AD storylines. And as a reader, I enjoyed those a lot.
Yeah, so I collected that as well. So I'm much to my wife's chagrin, they take up quite a lot of space, but the hardback editions are fantastic. It's nice to see some of those collections.
You have a room in your house devoted to comics and graphic novels and toys and various comics related things. So how do you fit it all in?
Well, I do at the moment. I have got a lot of bookshelves available at the moment, but yes, space is a commodity at the moment. I think I'm losing that battle. So the attic.
Well, before I got married, my entire flat was festooned with comics and not so much toys, because I've never really been a toy collector, but comics, books, graphic novels, and which I now everything has been more or less moved to a small room upstairs, which is like a small museum of my old life.
Yeah.
I kept the best stuff, all my favourite stuff, but I have. With great reluctance, had to part company with a lot of it, just in order to, fit in everything else, like, cupboards and a cooker and a telly, all the things you need to survive in a domestic existence.
That's true. I've had to sacrifice certain things just so we can have a bed. Really, it's.
Well, yeah, that too.
It's one of those. But no, it's been. I mean, I'll be honest. I mean, from an Eagle Moss perspective, I also I collect the DC graphic novel collection, and that's been another wonderful one where it's introduced me to, because I was a Marvel kid when I was younger, but I've sort of like I love Batman, I love Superman, so that collection has really introduced me to stories I hadn't read before, which has been really good.
Yeah, it's strange when you're a kid, isn't it? You always seem to be polarised towards one or the other. You either love Marvel or love DC, and if you love Marvel, then you hate DC. And it took me years to really get into anything a DC produced. I think probably my favourite comic series of all time is still Jack Kirby's Fourth World series for DC, which was the first thing he wrote and drew after leaving Marvel. I mean, it's so unusual, so unlike anything in comics before or since, and I still love it. I mean, I'd love to see it made into a movie, but again, it could never be the movie I have in my head. So perhaps it's just as well as it hasn't been. But I could just I look at that artwork in those comics now, and I still marvel at it in the same way I did as a kid. It's still got the magic for me.
I agree. I mean, I look back at some of the collections I've got, especially like Jack Kirby stuff from the 60s, all that, and the other one is, I really like Bill Sinkovich. I can never pronounce his name. Bill Sinkovich's art from like the 70s and early 80s, and even when the stories aren't to my taste, I can just sit and look at the art, and I think they're fantastic, and I really enjoy some of that.
Yes.
Talking about movies, though, and obviously we've mentioned the fact that there was a Judge Dredd TV show announced, and I really enjoyed the 2012 Dredd film with Carl Urban. I thought it was fantastic.
Yes, wasn't that great? Yes, I mean, it didn't have the budget to do a lot of the stuff that the Dredd strip did, but I mean, it really nailed Dredd as a character, and Anderson. It was very, very faithful and a very kind of prestigious. That's not the right word, but it was just a great adaptation of Dredd. I mean, I didn't dislike the Sylvester Stallone movie, at least the first 20 minutes of it, which was very, very Dread, but it does go off at a tangent very early on in the film, and it doesn't really have the the ethos of Dread. It's far too humane and friendly. But the great thing about was it 2012? Is it that long ago
yes,
already?
It was, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Carl Urban, he might not have the jaw, but he really nailed the character of Dredd. So everyone has been saying, all the talkbacks I've read ever since the Dredd TV series has been announced, is we've got to get Carl Urban. Carl Urban's got to be in it. And,
yeah, he would be brilliant. He was
I really
fantastic.
hope they do, because that would be a great starting point. I should just say, by the way, my wife's just knocked on the door and she's making kind of winding up her emotions. So I'm going to have to go in about 5 minutes.
That's fine. One last question then. Let's relate it to that then. With Dread being, it didn't get the popularity it deserved, I don't think, but there's never really been any has there ever been interest in any of the intellectual properties from 2000 AD for film or TV?
Well, there was at the time in the mid '90s. There was a kind of a whole separate division set up, Egmont Film and TV, which was all about based on the modest success of the Dredd movie, because it did okay, but using other 2000 AD properties, Slain and Rogue Trooper were particular favourites, with the idea of adapting those into movie or TV series. But I think it was slightly hidebound by the awful contract they sent out to everybody, which essentially suggested that you sign away all rights to everything in perpetuity forever. So
right.
Anything you might have created it automatically became the property of Egmont, and I almost everybody refused to sign the contract. I still got my copy of the Armageddon contract, which I didn't sign either. So it was all a bit stillborn. I mean, I think the problem with Egmont and formerly Fleetways, they never really knew what they had with 2000. They just didn't know what to do with it, and they seemed almost resentful of its success at the time. It was often a case of getting published against the odds, rather than the company backing you all the way. And I think that certainly changed since Rebellion took it on. They really know what they got with 2000 AD, and they've and everything I've heard so far about the Dredd TV series suggests that it's going to be good. So I think I would personally love to see a Rogue Trooper movie. I think that the closest we've seen so far is it's probably made in the 90s, a long time ago now, is a Kurt Russell movie called Soldier.
Yes.
That, if you watch that and imagine that as a Rogue Trooper movie, yes, that's what it should be. That's what it could be. And then talking about, I think, Bad Company as well would make an amazing film. I mean, it was inspired in part, I think, by Apocalypse Now. You can certainly see that, read it, but just incredibly cinematic. I mean, every summer there's another glut of blockbusters based on Marvel and DC characters. Some better than others, but I mean, there's all these fully formed, rich and exciting universes of characters out there, and it's the same with 2000 AD. All it really needs is a big hit. I mean, as successful as it was critically, I don't think the Dredd movie did all that well financially. No. But all it takes is a really big hit for studios to start taking notice again. And there's so much out there that could be out. I'd love to see a Slain movie as well, for example. Just imagine how great that could be.
Well, that's what I always think. When everyone talks about, amazing, how I can't wait to see the next series of Game of Thrones. I'm thinking, man, you should really be reading Slain.
Yes, they should. Right, I'm going to have to go.
Yeah.
I'm getting loud coughing from next door. But it's been great to talk to you. So
you too, John.
Have another chat sometime, because I really feel like we've only scratched the surface.
That would be fantastic. I'll contact you. We'll set some up for the future. Be amazing.
Okay. Well, thanks very much, Scott. It's been a real pleasure, and I'm.
Okay, well, there we have it. That's been 2 great interviews. The guys from Xenozoic Xenophiles, talking about Xenozoic tales, or Cadillacs and Dinosaurs, and a great conversation, a massively insightful conversation with former 2000 AD editor and creator of Armored Gideon, John Tomlinson, who I do think I will be contacting again to see if I can get him back on the show to get some more insights into 2000 AD and Judge Dredd and his other cohorts. I hope this has been insightful. I hope you find it interesting. These are two books I care deeply about, so I hope you go out and have a look for Xenozoic Tales and Google Armored Gideon and see if you can track down some of the progs, the issues of 2000 AD. I'm sure you won't be disappointed. Okay, well that's the show wrapping up. Thanks for sticking with us. Hope you enjoyed it. If you want to get in contact with me, same as usual, 20thcenturygeek@gmail.com. Visit the website 20thcenturygeek.com. Find me on Twitter @20thcenturygeek, and the same 20th Century Geek across Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, the usual. So hope you enjoyed it. Hope to hear from you again soon, and yeah, I'll see you next time.